building a restaurant right now that was supposed to be open now. It'll probably open in November. Trying to do, and you as someone from overseas may appreciate even more than New Yorkers. I'm very friendly with a guy, Indian American guy, who was born in Texas, and his dream has always been to sort of do the Indochine or the Nobu of Indian food.
Is he our $10 million guy or?
No, I wish. But we're doing a place on 20th Street next to Gramercy Tavern.
Right. Great location.
Oh, it's an insane location. And we're moving forward with it because after 3 months, the landlord finally came around, because at first they're like, no, we're not giving any rent concession.
And now they're like, we'll just give you rent free.
And we're like, well, then we're not building it. And we were lucky that, we were all, there's a degree of pregnancy that, so like, had we been 50% built, they would have held all that, but we hadn't really started the construction. And we said, look, if we walk away from your 4,000 square foot unbuilt space,
you're toast.
Who's taking it?
Yeah, there's a lot more of us and a lot more of them and a lot less of us.
Right, and I said anyone who's looking, actually, first of all, I told them, I said, I don't know anyone looking for a new restaurant space. Right. But if they are, they're going to go find a place that was finished 3 months ago and went out of business. They're not taking your blank slate.
Can't wait for my next guest, David Rabin, an icon of the New York club and bar world. In the 1990s, David was one of the founders of the famous Rex, 77 Lotus clubs, and later on V-Bar, Union Bar, and many more, just to name a few. Currently, he has the Lambs Club, Cafe Clover, American Bar, the Skylark, and Jimmy's on the Roof SoHo James Hotel. He's also an advisor for the Dorsey in Las Vegas. He has a few little projects that he's going to talk about today because he's still building his little empire. He's also opened a gig in Moscow. This guy grew up in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. Think Studio 54 and Ian Schrager's Palladium Club and many more. He's known as an innovator of the entertainment industry, an icon of the club and bar world, and an all-round good guy. Page 6 calls him the club guru. Market Watch calls him the New York Nightlife pioneer. He creates community-based programs to embrace and better understand the future of hospitality, and probably one of the dudes that helped the Meatpacking district become what it is today. An ex-lawyer who walked away from his craft to create a new one, a career, and his dream. All right, mate. David, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Nice to see you. Rob.
Nice to have you back in the room. We got our masks off, so we're socially distanced. I think we're about 6 feet away. You've got a pretty fascinating life. Like, I've been digging around trying to find some dirt on you. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything. I actually couldn't. I actually have amazing comments from lots of amazing people. So your career started out in Wall Street as a lawyer, right?
Well, my partner was on Wall Street. I was Park Avenue, but
right,
one and the same. Yeah, he was a derivatives trader, and I was a lawyer, literally Park Avenue.
And what happened? What year are we talking about? Are we talking early 80s?
Well, I joined a firm in 87, and about 89, 90 was when Will and I, Will was a close friend of mine from college. We went to Tufts together, and I unbelievably was representing one singer named Al B. Shore. Mm-hmm. And just at the moment that he was sort of blowing up as a one-hit wonder, and I was getting invited to all these incredible parties that I was like, how am I at this party?
Yeah.
And I kept running into Will, who basically the handsomest guy in New York, and was living at the time with Iman for 5 years before she married David Bowie.
Wow.
And so their circle of friends was insane.
Of course.
And, we would go to these parties, and literally the most famous people in the world were like all around us and just chatting them up like it was, you and I chatting.
Sure.
And one night over a little too much tequila at Nell's, we sort of said, I hate my fucking job. And he's like, I hate my fucking job. And we sort of laughed and said, we could do this. And we called each other the next day. Like, I know we were drunk, but were you serious? Because I was kind of serious.
It's like you could do a club.
Yeah. We looked around the room. We were at Nell's. We must have known 80% of the people. And Nell's at that moment was the shit. And, there was MK, and there was a great little place, which I don't know if people have mentioned to you over time, called Peggy Sue's, which was kind of thrown together by this model and a fireman who was also a model. Great guys.
Like an absolute disaster in the making.
It was the greatest. It was like, the bathrooms were covered in old Playboy centerfolds. It was They basically spit and glue, but an amazing crowd. And we're like, look, we know everyone at all these venues, and what's the worst thing that'll happen is you'll go back to Wall Street, and I'll go back to being a boring lawyer. And, we did Rex, which happened to open just not by plan, but at the exact sort of zeitgeist moment of that supermodel era, that Linda, Cindy, Naomi, Christie thing, and the George Michael video, the Freedom
That was your
thing.
first gig, right, Rex?
That was our first
What
gig.
year was that?
1990.
So for people who are in 1990 and your first club gig, you're a lawyer.
Yeah, and we opened a restaurant on the first floor with a nightclub and live music. And the good news was everyone in the world showed up. The bad news was what we hadn't figured out was quite how to deal with the fact that when you went to Palladium or one of the big clubs, even if they comped 500 people at the door, 3,000 people paid.
Okay, so like we're talking Ian Schrager's Palladium, right?
Right,
so
like
90s.
mid-'80s was the height of it. And, it had this Keith Haring room that was a small private room and then a giant club. And so when we opened Rex, we had the very best of these small crowd, but we had nowhere to charge the excess people. So, and it was before bottle service. So we would have this room full of 300 amazing people having a great time. The waitresses couldn't get to the tables. No one paid at the door because they were all somebody.
Yeah.
So we ended up making no money, but we got put on the map. And that was what led to the insanity of going to Moscow.
Because the thing is, that was after the debacle of 54 and its closure. And there's a documentary with Schrager out. I'm sure you've seen it and the whole story. And it's actually kind of fascinating for people that didn't live in New York City to understand how the whole club genre kind of changed after 54, right? And
I think Keith McNally really deserves a lot of credit because Nels was, at that time all the big clubs were, if you didn't know anyone, you could get online and pay $30 to get in or whatever. And,
sure.
And then of course there were private rooms for the insider folks. And then Keith opened Nels and was kind of like $5 for everybody.
Yeah.
And actually famously Eddie Murphy, and I don't know if this is a true story or not, but it would put Nels on the map in some extent, was Eddie Murphy rolled up and of course, there's 500 people online and they lift the rope and they're like $5 and he's like,
what the fuck?
I'm Eddie Murphy. And they're like, well, everyone else has $5.
So you should have $5.
Right. And he didn't come in. And it
Joking.
No.
So it pissed him off.
The other club that I don't know if people have mentioned to you that was really a game changer was Area, which was Serge Becker and Eric Good. They're just friggin' geniuses.
And these are big venues, right? They weren't
were huge.
Like now we don't see that. Well, we see some of that now.
More in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Pre-COVID, even the last generation of clubs outside probably Tao and a bunch of big ones, they're not as large anymore,
They're
right?
not. The real estate doesn't allow for it. Community boards don't allow for it.
Right.
And I think the largest ones are these sort of warehouse venues in Brooklyn.
Right.
But yeah, the days of those sort of, Palladium's now a dorm.
I don't think you and I are cool enough to go to Brooklyn.
I'm definitely not cool enough to go.
When we're in Bushwick, we might look homeless. So hey, Luke, I got somebody that I'm going to read something out to you. You're going to go and guess who this is. I think it'll be pretty easy at the end. So this dude, I've been friends with for a while, and we live together on an island, so that shouldn't give it away too much.
Oh, jeez.
And I've had some fun with him. He said, David was the kind of moral compass we all wanted. We always hoped he would run for office for New York City mayor. Don't know what that's about. David was always on the community board associations, founded the Meatpacking Association, Nightlife Association, and this will give it away. And Jay and I were always drunk and partied, and he was the responsible one. Do you know who said that?
It has to be my friend Mark Baker.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. He sends his regards. He's sitting in Bali.
Yeah.
I remember he opened, he came straight out of New York, 2013, opened Townhouse in Bali.
Yeah.
He's responsible for my liver being the size it is. I remember partying there quite a lot.
And that he was supposed to be healthy over there and be doing organic.
Well, now he's got a juice bar.
Yeah.
But I always say to him, like, dude, just because you're wearing a sarong doesn't make you healthy. But he kind of said to me, you were the founding vision of 777, right?
Yeah, basically what happened was it was almost a Godfather 3 moment. It's to backtrack a little bit. Will and I came back from Russia and did a place called Union Bar, and we were sort of happily not doing nightclubs.
What were you doing in Russia? Let's backtrack for a second. I want to get to that.
Okay.
What happened in Russia? Because you opened something.
Oh, we did basically open the Studio 54 in Moscow with actually the designers of Studio 54.
Wow.
We thought we were working for an import-export bank, which they did indeed own.
Sure.
But about 6 months into the process, we found out we were working for basically the head of the mafia for southern Moscow.
Excellent. Good
for
choice.
Moscow and southern. It actually turned out to be, after 1 or 2 terrifying moments, it turned out to be a great choice because we had not really understood why we were in sort of this protected bubble.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it became clear that basically Kaiser Sose had, bubbled us up and said, don't fuck with these guys. But we went there very naively because, if you think back, and again, people may be too young, 1992, 93, the press about Russia was they want to be democratic, they want to be capitalist, they want Americans' help. There was no stories about Russian mafia. No. That started coming out a little bit later.
Sure.
So we went over there, we're like, oh my God, we're in the middle, literally I don't know if you've been there, but the middle of Red Square.
Yeah,
we
amazing.
The best location
I know where it was.
on the planet.
Yep.
I could throw a baseball into the Kremlin had I wanted to. And they really listened to us. And, we did stuff that, it's the old playbook for us.
How old were you?
31.
And so you're in Russia,
Yeah.
hoping like a kind of a post-54 with the designers.
Yes.
What was the name of it?
That was the only thing they didn't listen to us about, and they were right. They wanted to call it Manhattan Express, which to me sort of was like, Manhattan Express. But they were like...
Train ride.
They're like, it can't be subtle. We have to hit people over the head. They've never heard, this has to feel like New York. And they were right. It was, up until then, clubs in Moscow were all like converted gymnasiums at colleges that they hung up giant lights and a couple of speakers.
Right.
These guys really spent money. They hired great designers. They hired us to run it. They let us go to all the modeling agencies and make all the girls members. Stuff that you would do here. And plus, our staff was the sort of the key was, an average Russian at that time was making about $60, $70 a month.
Yeah, wow.
And so we went to these girls at the agencies and said, we'll pay you $30 a night to be a hostess.
Jesus.
And, they were making more than their dads.
You destroyed a lot of modeling careers.
Well, they were making more than their dads overnight
and
supporting their families. And so they were so grateful. And so we had this like lineup of gorgeous
Were you in
guys
like a little bit of a fantasy land in your head? Did it feel dreamlike?
It did. I mean, it was so exciting. It felt like I was a poli-sci major, so to be in the middle of the evil empire and thinking naively that we were helping change it was sort of exciting. And we thought it was going to open this world to us of people coming to us and saying, well, we want to do something in Germany or China or Japan. Didn't end up exactly that way, but it did end up, ironically, Union Bar came out of that because it was some Russian people that we met who said, we need help with our bagel shop. We're like, we don't know much about bagels, but this would be a great bar. It was right down the block from here, Park Avenue.
I'll remember you the next time I think of bagels. I was like, this could make a great club. So how long were you there for?
We had a 2-year consulting agreement that stretched to about 2.5 through construction. And at the end of it, they had hired our Russian replacement. Yeah. And by then I had become quite friendly with these guys. And I was like, this is not the guy.
They were like,
6 months.
This is the guy.
No, 6 months later, they brought us back. I had a gentleman's bet with them. And by then, they had kind of really allowed the place to be trashed. It was filled with like everything we didn't let in, low-level gangsters, a lot of prostitutes.
But I mean, like, it's kind of interesting because obviously I lived in Bali for a while and I watched, not that happen, but over the last 20 years, it's changed a lot. How did you stop those people coming in? Is because you were protected and they knew not to mess with you guys?
Well, that and, yes. I mean, that's what we really, look, we had the obvious thing. We had lots of guys we had a gun check. In America, I would never, if a place had a gun check, I'm like going the other direction. In Moscow, if you didn't have a gun check, I wasn't going in.
Yeah.
So we'd have all these gorgeous girls come out with little, Chanel bags and check their little 2-shooter in a safe. It was incredible. So, we were very well protected, but they did let us curate. The idea was, just like how New York used to be before everyone had a black card became the new VIP, as Steve Lewis says. Back then, they let us go with the artists, the models, the rock stars, and make them. And then everyone else, of course, wants to be around that.
Did you ever get it wrong? Like you got somebody out the front, and they're like, "No, we're not letting him in," and then somebody goes, "You kind of need to let him in."
Well, it is a good story. I was out there trying to teach this great doorman, this great-looking doorman who was a little thick, but he was a beautiful guy, who I wanted him to pick out of literally, it's one of those scenes of 400 people in a semicircle. And as he's doing it, as I'm like saying, that girl back there and that, a guy in the front keeps lifting. Now, granted, there's 2 guys behind me with machine guns, so I'm not that unsafe. But this guy keeps lifting the rope, and I don't even really look him in the eye. I just keep taking it out of his hand and putting it down. He's going to try and let himself in. Yeah. And under my breath to myself, it's like the 3rd time I say to myself, who the fuck does this guy
think he is?
And he goes, I am your fucking problem. like Arnold, like straight out of the fucking Terminator. Shit. And I'm like, oh my God. But I turned around and, one of these giant guys stepped forward. But that was the closest it came at the door. Other things came closer, but that was my moment of like, oh, I'm not in New York anymore.
And there were no cell phones around, like so no one could call you and go, you need to let Igor in. He owns half the club. I just forgot to tell you that
we were on our own.
So there wasn't some. I'm sure it was a shady area, but was it fun?
It was beyond fun.
And you lived there as well. What was the lifestyle outside the club scene for you, apart from sleep?
We lived in the hotel in which the club was, and my normal life was a little, I'd go running, and no one in Moscow ran back then. All I did was drink and smoke. So they'd look at me like I was from friggin' Mars, and in my running clothes.
Must be American.
Yeah. But our life was good. Aside from not that many choices to eat, we had a restaurant in the building, so we didn't leave the building all that much. Plus, Moscow, as you know, is cold as fucking hell. Except for 4 months a year. But you know what? There was kind of a division between people who were really excited about us being there and really wanted to work with us and learn from us, and then an old school, almost Putin-esque, like, what the fuck do we need the Americans for? We're Mother Russia. But the regular folks that we work with, the people that worked for us, they were fantastic. They were excited. They wanted to learn. They taught us shit. I never felt more unsophisticated in my life, actually. Our translators were these women in their 40s, and we get in the car, and they'd be playing classical music, and they not only knew who the composer was, they knew which quartet it was, and they knew which conductor it was, and I'm like, how do you know this stuff? They were just fascinating people who had real educations, and I felt incredibly inadequate, actually.
Did you end up having some friendships after that when you came back to the US?
Oh, sure. I mean, I stayed in touch with a lot of them. I mean, it would be so much easier now with every different social media advice. But, I'm on Facebook with 4 or 5 of them, and, I text a couple of them for their birthdays and stuff.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Have you been back?
I have not been back since '96. I'm dying to go back.
I went 2005.
Love
Moscow.
to see it.
Froze my balls off. I love Moscow. 777, the first place, other than Milk and Honey. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Right.
Mark gave me this at a lowdown, and I actually did. I actually did a bit of research on it. Other than Milk and Honey, 777 was the first place. You got the legend Sasha Petrovsky.
Yes.
To do crafted cocktails, and you kind of put it on the map, right?
Well, so I had this epiphany. We had Lotus, which was at the moment, it was the Studio 50 or Palladium of that moment, 2000 era. The big club that put it. We sort of put the Meatpacking District. You mentioned it earlier. Along with Pastis and a store called Jeffrey's, we were sort of the first big arrivals in the Meatpacking District. And a few years into it, I finally went to Milk and Honey, which I had heard about a million times, and was just completely blown away. I'd never had a drink like that in my life. I was a vodka soda guy.
Yeah. Most of the world was at that point. Crafted cocktails weren't a thing. So if you're listening to this and you're like 30, you're like, oh my God, my life without a, whatever.
A Moscow Mule or a Gold Rush. So I go to this place finally. It only has 22 seats.
Right.
And I'm literally, and I don't drink that much. I just had like 8 drinks.
I know, I've tried to get you drunk. I'd
never had drinks like that in my life.
Yeah.
And so I went back to my partners and I said, if we could take our crowd, which is, at that moment was sort of, but they've been at the Lotus now 400 times. They're like, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
If we could give them this level of cocktail in a small, beautiful, intimate room. And I had happened upon a designer in LA named Dodd Mitchell who had done 4 restaurants that I thought were great and sexy and beautiful and sort of lush. And a space became vacant across the street from Lotus. And we, it was just one of those zeitgeist moments. Unfortunately, it was too much of a zeitgeist moment because 18 months into it, Apple came to the neighborhood and then Hugo Boss. Our rent was $60 a square foot. Apple signed it like $285 and Hugo Boss signed it $525.
What year are we now?
2006.
Yeah, right.
So our landlord forced us out and sold the building. At our literally we were like this. Like
but tell us about Sasha and who he was,
Sasha was
he's passed away, right, and who he was for the younger generation.
Well, Sasha was, he really was a creation out of the 30s or 40s. I mean, he even dressed that way. He wore page boy caps and he wore suspenders, and he just returned New York to this era of pre-prohibition cocktails. He brought back all the legendary cocktails. He did it. His place was run so tight, Milk and Honey. There were rules there about men not speaking to women unless they were asked. And, people thought it was goofy, but it really, really worked. And he was, we were so grateful that he agreed to do the cocktail program at 777. We were kind of shocked because he was so in his lane. But I think he really believed that we believed in his vision. And we really turned the cocktail program over to him. He also did the cocktail program at Lamb's Club when we opened Lamb's.
Do you think he was like everybody wants to be the pioneer. You're a pioneer in just districts, understanding districts. But do you think he was for crafted cocktails? I had a ton of bars, and you have too.
Right.
Do you think he was kind of like the pioneer of
for
crafted
me,
cocktails?
I think so. I mean,
York?
the people also would say Dale DeGroff.
Yes. And can you tell a little bit about him?
Just another sort of legendary guy. But for me, Sasha connected with our crowd just so perfectly. And he worked so well collaboratively with our team.
Sure.
So I would say he's sort of one of 2 or 3 people that is the reason that you go, and now everywhere you go has a big chunk of rock.
Yep.
And has fresh pressed juice. Yep. And I really do think Sasha and maybe two other people are the reason for that. And I love that it was nice of Mark to bring it up, that because Double Seven is actually, even though it only lasted a year and a half, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, because it really was sort of my executive producing role. I was like, well, if we take that and that and that and that, I think we're going to have a hit. And
yeah, wow. Do you think those two boys, if they saw the cocktail programs now, they'd be horrified? Do you think Sasha would be horrified if he saw what's going on now? Or would he be pleasantly surprised?
I think he'd be pleasantly surprised, but keeping it pure. I mean, I work now in Vegas and on a couple of upcoming projects with the guys who bought Milk and Honey from him and turned it into Attaboy, Sam and Mickey. And they're very much keeping up his legacy at Attaboy. But Sam he'll bend tradition a little bit in a very, very sort of creative way. He's done amazing work for us in Vegas. And we're going to do some stuff in New York, assuming that the pandemic ever abates.
We'll get to that. Double Seven. Ironically, I actually built a few places in Double Six Hotel in Bali, right? And that was a famous club. I'm guessing he's the wealthiest man in Bali. He probably just came to Double Seven, went, I can do Double Six.
That's funny. The name, it really just came about because there's a place in Vegas that I love the name, called the Double Down.
Yep.
And then we were on 14th Street, and 2 times 7 is 14. So we were like, and it just sounded old school.
Double Seven. So a lot of well-known people went through the it wasn't a long life of Double Seven, but a lot of people know about it, and everybody I've spoken to brings it up.
Oh, that's funny. That's nice.
And so, was it the hit that you wanted it to be when it started picked up, or did it take some time? Or?
No, it's sort of, that was the funny thing. I mean, it was actually a problem in a way, because Lotus held 600-700 people.
Yep.
And I mean, name the person,
who hasn't been there.
Benicio del Toro and Bono and De Niro and Tom Cruise. Go down the list, and then all of a sudden, literally 50 feet across the street, we opened a place that only holds 80 people.
Yeah.
So a lot of people were not so happy with us.
Yeah, of course, because then you wanted to know you could fill it with, a bespoke.
And it was a very bespoke crowd.
Yeah.
And it was difficult some nights, and we'd say, well, if you hang at Lotus for an hour, we'll come grab you. And in a lot of cases, we were able to do that. But we had an amazing door guy named Damien, who went on to work at Rose Bar and run Rose Bar after Nur. And then he opened his own place called Et Al. And he was sort of the most amazing gatekeeper, because he was able to sort of dissuade people and let them keep their dignity, which I think is one of the hardest.
Of course, because I was just thinking that in my mind when you were talking about who was coming there and who wasn't. And I had the Icebergs restaurant famous in Sydney, and I remember for a decade there, it became a kind of a celebrity thing by default. We didn't go. You don't go aiming for that stuff, and if it happens, you of course embrace it, because press is press. Right. But I've got some people that used to hang out at Lotus. And I was going to ask you about when Lotus took off and everybody was there. So Mark, I've got a picture, which you can't see on the camera, which you can post online. I got a picture that I got. And I can see, I'm going to turn it to you. You can have a look.
The Clintons, yeah.
So I got a picture of you,
funny.
Mark Baker with long hair. He's still trying to grow it back. Hillary and Bill and your wife.
Yeah.
And Mark says, you guys hung out in the hallway a little bit. A lot of people kept coming and whispering in Bill's ear. I mean, were they hanging out in the club?
It was an event for the guy who was running for governor at the time, and in New York, and they came to support. And the funny thing is, she was a sitting senator at the time. He was, out of office already. But she was sitting by herself in the back room, and everyone was like a moth to a flame around Bill, and there was Hillary sitting. I went and sat and chatted with her. She was lovely, and ironically, now she comes to Lamb's Club fairly often.
Yep.
It was sort of befuddling to me the first time that I walked by the table. She's like, "Hey, David, how you doing today?" I did, kind of wanted a triple take, like, did Hillary Clinton just call me by name? So last night, I was listening to a podcast or an IGTV that a friend of mine, Damon, does, legendary Damon, who's sort of a New York
I've seen it. Yeah. I listened to your podcast with him, actually.
Oh, you did?
Super fun.
And he's great. And he had on Misty Copeland last night, and who's also a great friend. And she met her husband at Lotus on a Sunday night, which is one of my favorite stories. And then they ended up having their engagement party at Jimmy and their wedding party at the Skylark. But I saw her at Equinox in probably 2004 or 5, and I said, "Hey, you should really come down to Lotus on one night. You'd love it." And she's like, "I go to Lotus every Sunday. What are you talking about?"
See, your personality is probably the best described, talking to all your friends and partners, is the most public private person. Because even when I dug around, some history and I talked to a bunch of people, everybody consistently said the same thing. They all think you're a genuine human being and they thought you were great, but you also weren't overtly in everybody's face when you were running these gigs. You were like the dude. And, you could have exploited that a little bit more. There's plenty of club people out there that basically think they invented the universe. But you actually did create and pioneer a bunch of these clubs. Have you always been are you an extrovert, introvert, or?
Well, it's funny.
It's hard enough to get you to come downtown for fucking drink. Who knows getting you out to a club? It's
funny because I've been married through this whole thing. But,
right.
Each if you look back in college, you might have called me an alpha. I was did very well in school, and I was on the lacrosse team and all this stuff.
Sure.
But each partner I've had, a lot of it's been strategic. I mean, certainly I knew a ton of people when we did Rex, but Will was literally like the Bachelor of New York.
Yep.
So it would be foolish of me to try and supplant this guy. So I was like, cool, my friends will come, but if Will's the draw, Will's the draw.
Sure.
Similarly, when we did Lotus, Will and I had what I would call residual juice. We were only 6 or 7 years past Rex. But we had been in Russia, we had done Union Bar, and we kind of got grabbed back in to do Lotus. And I said to Will, if we're going to do this, we really need younger partners who are really in the front of it right now.
You need a couple of racehorses because they got to get up and do it and stay there till 3. Yeah,
it was Jeffrey and Mark.
Yep.
And our first meeting with Mark and Jeffrey was at Union Bar. It was on Park Avenue South, and we had a big picture window that was actually open to the street, and it was about 7 feet off the ground. And in the middle of the meeting, Mark, since you know him so well, you can well imagine, he just, in mid-sentence, jumps out the window onto Park Avenue South to chase a girl.
I can't believe it.
To chase a girl on a bike named Greta or whatever.
He still does that in Bali, I'm sure.
Oh, my God. And I looked at Will, I'm like, oh, my God.
Now he does it on a scooter.
I'm like, we're going in business with these guys. So
a couple of favourite bars from the 80s and 90s. Am I right to say one of them was Palladium?
I had a great time in Palladium because although my gray hair now would not speak to it, I used to just love to go dancing, and I had a couple of guys that we would just go dance. We didn't give a shit. Like one of them is Bobito Garcia, who's a big DJ now, and a guy named Brenton, and we really weren't if we met girls, great, but really we just loved music and we loved dancing.
Well, but speaking of dancing, I'm going to come back to this question.
Okay.
So she says he's probably the best employer. I'm not making this up, employer, dancer and human that this person knows and has funk in his trunk. And I said to her, what the fuck does that mean? And she said, I mean, because she actually said funk in his junk at the beginning and then she spell checked it. And I said, what does that mean? And she meant trunk. And she said, no, he's actually a really, really good dancer.
That's funny. It's actually, again, it's something that I almost never do in front of the staff.
Yep.
But that was a lot of the reason that we got into the business was because I went to clubs not, of course, when I started, I was single and bored as a lawyer and going out, but really I just loved to dance and I was pretty good at it. And I would go out with this crew of 3 or 4 guys and we, like I said, we just could have cared less. And
so I got another picture of that.
Oh, God. A lot of it was at Rex.
Was it?
Yeah.
So that
Not Rex, I'm sorry. At Nell's. The downstairs dance floor of Nell's was just, Stretch Armstrong talked about it the other night. I forget, but it was just a dark place that you could just go
dance.
Get your groove on.
Yeah, and it didn't matter if you were on your own or with somebody, and no one gave a shit. Asia's a lot like that. Even now, it doesn't matter, boys, girls, they're kind of not trying to be cool. That's you trying to be cool.
Oh, you know Susan.
Who? Yeah, that's who talked to me. So Susan was living in Bali. She's a New Yorker,
she's
and
fantastic.
she actually said she thinks you're one of the best humans that she's ever known and worked with, nice. And I was like, wow.
Susan was a legendary girl for us at the cocktail server. She was because she was. It's a rare girl who's beloved by the customers and the staff.
She did that in Bali when they opened, her and Mark opened Townhouse. Yeah. It was really ambitious. They did a cafe art gallery on the first floor because that's what you do. And then they did 2 or 3 levels and then a rooftop smack bang in the middle of Bali and just blew it up. And they had a lot of fun.
She's fantastic. She was such a pro. And it was sort of the thing, people would come in and if she wasn't there, they were like, Where's Susan?
Where's Susan?
It was a gal named Monica who ran the platform, which was sort of our VIP area, and Susan was the server up there. And if 2 of them weren't there, there was just something a little off,
And there was another bar, Mars. Tell me about Mars. Is that a favorite? Was that a favorite? I heard that it might have been a favorite.
I liked Mars just because Mars was the great Rudolph, who's a name that should not be forgotten from New York Nightlife because he was behind so many clubs, including Danceteria. He's mostly now in Latin America, running clubs in Brazil and stuff. But Rudolph took this old warehouse meatpacking thing like all the way. Right now it's probably $1 billion condo building, but at the time it felt so outlaw. It was probably the West Side Highway and 10th Street or something, and no one lived anywhere near there. And literally the sound system was like one of those TV commercials. You walked in and like your whole body just shook from the music.
That changes a venue when the sound, the programming is... Yeah.
It was in your soul. And so people would just go there and dance. And they had way before there were rooftops like Jimmy, they had just opened their rooftop and people would just go up and hang on the roof and no one cared because it was a deserted area. So yeah, Mars was a lot of fun. I would say for me, the most fun I had though was probably before we did our own places was Nell's, and I loved Peggy Sue's because you would just literally go in jeans and a t-shirt and you'd know you were going to sweat yourself through your clothes and and
have a good time.
Yeah,
and no one was texting you on your phone because
there were no phones.
That's the point. Awesome. I wish it was like that now. So I noticed there was a New York Times article post September 11th, and it was a night out with you, and they basically went around town with you with a journalist, and that was kind of really interesting because they were post September 11th. Is it okay to have fun? And
it was very weird time.
It was a weird time, right? I was here about 3 months after, and the city was coming back to life, but there was a weird energy.
Well, it almost no one could really tell. I mean, I remember the first time I looked down from sort of the mezzanine in Lotus and saw people dancing and how sort of puzzled and pleasantly surprised I was because for a while restaurants were doing okay because people still had to eat.
Sure.
But the whole idea of doing anything celebratory just felt wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, when 3,000 people die in the morning, and just, if you weren't here at the time, I mean, for a while, the whole city smelled of smoke.
Yeah, I remember.
And the really crazy thing was, I rode my bike to Lotus because the subways were all out, and I just wanted to see what was going on. And then I rode my bike to St. Vincent's, which was the hospital near Lotus at the time, to say, do you need any help with like ambulances? Or I didn't know what to do. It was maybe 2 hours after it happened, and they're like, there's no survivors. And it was, so you just ride. It was chilling, So I just rode my bike back up the West Side Highway and probably saw 10,000 people, and I'm not exaggerating, waiting for ferries to take them back to New Jersey because all roads were closed. And it went on and I remember not that much longer after, it had to be less than a year, New York had a really bad blackout.
Yeah.
And we all assumed
terrorist attack.
It was a terrorist attack. And by that time I had Tyler was born at September 11th, but I was home when that happened. But when the blackout happened, I remember literally walking and running home 3.5 miles as best I could in my dress clothes.
Sure.
Because I was just fucking panicked.
It was gun shy, right? Like, I mean, I remember the first time. I can't tell you if it was in the first year that I heard a jet engine fly over New York, and I think I was on the Upper West Side, and everybody just looked up. And I was walking, and at that point I was just like, da-da-da-da. Right. And everybody's looking up, and I'm like, oh, somebody's doing something. And I'm like, and then I heard the roar, and it was just a plane very high up. It was just paranoia, right? And so it's really fascinating that time because obviously you still had a business, right? And then the countries, it's easy to look back and judge everything that happened, but in that moment, everybody was preparing to go to war, which that was happening. So it was a really weird time to go, hey, let's go out clubbing and dancing and drink with our friends.
No one was thinking that.
Yeah.
And it actually, and I don't talk about it much because in the scheme of things, it's a commercial loss versus tremendous loss of life. But we were about to sign a lease to do Lotus in Vegas. We would have been first of the New York clubs, eventually Tao and these others. But we had a deal. We had a bar in Vegas at the time called V-Bar that was doing very well. And the Venetian wanted us to bring Lotus to Vegas.
Wow.
And we were literally days away from signing. And then Vegas shut completely down for 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
And the dumbest thing I've done many dumb things, but I watched Sheldon Adelson buy his own stock when it was down to $1.
Of course.
And I was like, I was too stupid to be like, well, if he's betting on himself, I don't have $1 billion.
Yeah.
I could buy a couple of $1,000 worth of stock at $1.
It would have been a lot worth a lot. Yeah, I get it.
Pretty dumb.
But maybe because also that, that inertia that was happening and the time frame and the news that was coming out, and it wasn't as graphic now as it is now. Sorry, then it wasn't as graphic. You're not getting bombarded from every angle. There wasn't, social media bombardment.
It was just a crazy day because usually, as you would know, probably yourself too, but in those days I wasn't waking up early, but we had a brand new baby, and it was election day. It was primary day, and I had woken up early and took my son in those one of those baby things to go vote, and came back. It was maybe 9 in the morning. I flipped on CNN. And I'm like, oh shit, a private plane. My first thought was a private plane went off course.
Yeah, we all thought it was like a little Cherokee or something flew into the building.
And then I'm sitting there watching, and then the second one, and it just utter. And so I gave my wife the Tyler, the baby, and I jumped on a bike because I was like, what the fuck, And
well, our Prime Minister, I was in Melbourne, and our Prime Minister of Australia was actually, I think, here on Washington, and was grounded. And I remember coming home. I actually remember walking. I was working in the restaurant that night. I don't exactly remember what day it was, but where I was, it was like 11 o'clock at night. And I remember my French Moroccan pastry chef, who had Arab descent, was up in the pastry kitchen, and we were giggling and we're like, let's have a beer. And he's like listening to the news, and he just looks at me and he goes, this is going to be bad. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I was like, oh, okay, it was the radio, right? It was
right.
And so I got home, and it was like unfolding, and I woke up. Got home. I woke up my partner at the time, and we both sat there for, I think, 7 straight hours, because that was our only source of information, right? And so we're watching cable for that entire time, and then watching the whole thing unfold. So wind forward before we get to this COVID. So now we've got. You're a New Yorker, blood and sweat and tears. Long Islander? No.
Yeah, an hour, about 45 minutes from here. I grew up.
Okay, and so we've got September 11th, then Hurricane Sandy, GFC.
Before Sandy was, the crash in 2007-8 and Madoff.
Right. So GFC is like 7, 8, 9.
Right.
Then Sandy. Right. Now COVID. We'll get to COVID. I don't want to turn too dark on this show because we've had a good time, but this city bounces back. I think all cities bounce back. It's very seldom that cities that don't have, but this city particularly feels like even the energy is very different here. Being Australian and living in New York for a while, not as long as you, I'm a big believer in New York, and I love community and so forth. There's a huge difference in all these crises.
Yes.
So because in 8 or 7 or 8, we thought we're all going to run out of money and basically use, gold as currency, and, everybody was putting things under their bed. Then Hurricane Sandy I never realized. I'd moved recently down to Seaport, kind of Fiddy financial district, and for the viewers who don't live here, closer to the water. And I even saw the other day when I was going for a run, the barricades they've put by the water, just recently, actually. And I was talking to someone, and Paris Cafe, that's down in the financial district, finally closed, and I saw a notice on the window, and the guy's like, look, he's like, I've been through 9/11, he's like, I've been through the GFC, and he goes, and Hurricane Sandy put 3 feet of water in my venue, had a picture of it, and he had, I remember, a floating table in the dining room, and then he's like, this COVID thing's just one too many things. And it was kind of interesting because we are on the 4th crisis, real hardcore crisis, in between all the blizzards and electricity, all kinds of terrorist plots, car bomb, kind of stuff.
Right.
Now winding forward with COVID, very different circumstances, but you're feeling now, and post this, what are you feeling now about the city?
I do agree with you. Obviously, I've been through all those things, and there has been tremendous resiliency. I'm hoping that this isn't structurally different. Because no one in the world has changed so much in terms of connectivity that even after the financial crisis or Sandy or any of those other things, there was no optionality to work from home.
Right.
So the great question mark for me, and I'm reading probably the same stuff you're reading and watching. The great question mark is
Fox News. Is that what you're doing? Just checking.
Is how much emphasis people put on collegiality of being in the workplace,
right?
And the interchange of ideas that happen spontaneously rather over a Zoom call.
Sure.
So I know some of the banks are calling their people back. Like we have a place called the Lambs Club that's kind of closed indefinitely at the moment because we rely on two kinds of clients, right? During the day, it's heavy business. We're on 44th and time, and
I love the Lambs Club
for your audience, just so they know. So we're heart of the Times Square area, but sort of the nicest restaurant there with Jeffrey Zakarian, who's a sort of world famous chef. And we have two problems because in the daytime, our audience is all lawyers, bankers, Viacom, et cetera.
Sure.
They're all out of their offices now. I think occupancy in Times Square is under 10%.
Yeah, wow.
Not tenancy. I mean, they're just not coming to the office.
Yeah.
And then at night, our entire audience is pre-theater.
Right.
And Broadway is talking about next summer, basically. I mean, they're talking March and April.
Yeah.
But I think if you really talk to someone, they'll tell you we're hoping for June.
But don't you think it's kind of nuts? Like I have to keep asking myself this question. So I can get on a plane, and I can breathe recycled air in, sit next to you, but I can't sit 6 feet away from you in my dining room. What's the logic?
I don't know the logic. I'm hesitant to question Cuomo because I have to applaud the guy for what he did.
Yep.
I mean, if you look at the rest of the country and you look at us, I feel like New York's the safest place to be in America right now. It's just oddly enough.
Yeah. Not when it started, everybody was like, "Oh, you guys suck." We're not coming there, and now everybody's like, "We might come to New York."
Well, he was masterful in his leadership, I think, and people here are cognizant and they pay attention.
Sure.
That's why I was kind of surprised about California. When I heard LA was suffering as badly, I feel like LA has a lot of, they have a Democratic governor, Democratic mayor, bright populace, so, I agree with you. I think we have to try the experiment of, I know we're trying 25% very shortly and we'll then try 50%. But I've also read all these articles about is the virus changing,
is it mutating?
Mutating to so where masks may not be effective. And so I think, they're learning as they go. And the virus is, we have to remember it's probably 7-8 months old that it was identified. And
you and I got venues that are shut, right? Like we've got both, and we've got
three of mine are closed.
And I've got a big, 7,500 square foot bar, club, kind of restaurant. And, we all know the pain and we're all feeling it. It's really interesting. If we were to just skip over restaurants for 1 second, because you are from a world where I'm really fascinated by the club world. There are some big people out there now, like the Towels.
Right.
What are they going to do?
Yeah, no, look, I've been thinking about that business for a long time for different reasons, because I think festivals, or they're not all festivals. I think Tinder, I think festivals, I think the geographic spread of New York to Brooklyn and Queens have all had big impact on the vitality of New York nightlife to begin with.
Sure.
But now add this in, and that it's the lowest priority on someone's, on the governor or the mayor's. Nightclubs have always gotten short shrift. No one really, that was sort of the whole.
Because there's an illusion that you're all basically billionaires and you own a club because you're bored and you're not supposed to make any money.
Right. And meanmeanwhere I'm in the subway and I'm trying to figure out how to pay my kids' college tuition.
And anybody that's a restaurateur that drives a Ferrari isn't a restaurateur. Right. There's something else. So Gordon Ramsay's smart enough to make money on television. That's why he has a Ferrari.
So, you're right. I don't know. I mean, I would hate to be in a position where, whether it's Richie Akiva with Up and Down and One Oak or the Tao, Mark and Jason and Noah, they've done phenomenal work over the years, and I don't know when they're going to be able to fill their venues back up. And it's actually, in a weird way, we've benefited from it a little bit. And I'm only the consultant, but the 3 venues we have in the Venetian are actually doing well because their capacity, their normal capacity is only about 200.
Right.
So the big clubs are having a very hard time convincing people to come into them, because it's boring. Like a room set for 5,000, with a couple hundred people,
it's just
and
you and me dancing on the dance floor.
Looks awful. But our smaller venues that happen to have sound systems of that level, but were built for conversation, they've pivoted a little bit. I'm really glad the guy who's there locally running it saw it. He's like, look, there's 28, 29-year-olds who are dying to go out. They're not going to those big clubs at the Wynn. But they'll come, get their dance on, and have a couple of drinks at the Dorsey or Electra, and it's kind of working.
So in a way, there's a bit of a reshaping. Like all these crises do a spring clean, right?
Yes.
And I was talking to Josh, the Neuhaus CEO, the other day, and he kind of described
what a nice guy he is.
Yeah. He sort of he misspoke, and he said like a brush fire. He goes, no, and I go, you mean spring clean because there's so many fires in California, but now. Like every crisis does a spring clean. It's such a horrible way to see it because I do see it that way, because spring clean means everybody always assumes, well, the people that weren't doing well, they go.
That's bullshit.
Right.
It's
and
really,
so,
was their landlord reasonable, or was their landlord unreasonable?
well, and then there's an argument for landlords. I got a fairly reasonable landlord, but I'm a landlord in Scottsdale. I've got a small restaurant and boutique hotel, and we just said to our guy, of course you're not going to pay rent while you're shut.
Right.
And so there's an assumption that all landlords are wealthy to do people, but a lot of them have mortgages.
Well, what I was going to say is really and I just don't know if it's constitutional, but I think really the solution was, and it hasn't happened, but they've been great about no evictions and personal. But really, I think it should have been, okay, if you, also for gyms and boutique fitness places, I think they should have said, okay, you're not going to have to pay rent until, let's call it May of 2021, but also your landlord can't foreclose on you.
Sure.
But also, the bank or their lender, whomever that may be, can't foreclose on them.
Yeah.
That would have been, I think, the solution, because I think you're right. Like a lot of landlords, they're not bad guys. They have a mortgage out on their property. They can't go below a certain rent. But, almost worse than our business would be to have a hot yoga studio or
of course
a boxing gym.
But a hot yoga studio doesn't cost $3.5 million to put money in the ground, right? And then you have this asset. So, when you fit a restaurant out or a bar, like for anybody that's young that hasn't done that yet, you never get that money back ever, right? So and there's few of us that, like, I'm not private equity driven. I'm like myself and my business partner. And I know if you've got private equity right now, there's no one sitting around a board table allowing you to open or scale or expand.
Right.
So in reshaping this industry, we're doing crystal ball shit right now. Okay. So but you've got the experience of 20 young people. What do you think's going to happen? Do you think we're going to go smaller? Because Josh actually believe with Neuhaus, it's a unique brand, a community brand. Is things going to go more membership based, where there's a knowledge that things are safer in that venue? Because you just mentioned that with Las Vegas. Do you think the Las Vegas people are going to look and go, hey, no more 5,000 clubs. It's going to go down to 300, 400 and bring back intimacy?
I think for more reasons than one. I mean, I think part of, those clubs were driven by these enormous bottle prices, which paid for enormous DJ fees of, $300,000-$400,000 for a night. I just don't know if that economy is going to come back anytime soon. Although a lot of that was driven by Silicon Valley, and they're doing great through the crisis.
Of course.
So that's a little bit geographical. I actually think there's a possibility that New York nightlife may return to what it was like when I first started going out in the 80s and early 90s, where it wasn't so driven by what guy is a managing director at what bank and can buy a table of 20.
It sounds like a whole lot of fucking fun.
It would be if it went back to the artists and the the kids who were coming up with fashion.
It would be our creative design, music.
That's
fashion.
why everyone got into it, right?
Yeah.
And then Steve Lewis, who used to be an operator with Peter Gatien, and then he became a designer, and he had a blog. And he wrote a story about 15 years ago, and I thought he was wrong when I read it, but now the more I think about it, he said the new VIP is any douchebag with a black card. And
a hoodie.
Yeah, and I was kind of like, at the time I thought he was overreacting, but over time, it really, I would go to some of these places that were getting so much press, and I'd be like, it's just a bunch of Wall Street guys in the same board, models, like staring at their phone all night and not engaging with anybody.
Maybe because it's a little easier for them to promote themselves. In those days, it was really word of mouth. You went on Instagram, there was no Facebook.
Well, that was the, I honestly believe had Rex existed in the Instagram world, it would have, it was such a high concentration of sort of a celebrity quotient. And really what put us on the map in a weird way was, well, two things. We had a party for the end of, I do think, people argue who started this, who started.
Yeah, sure.
I do think we had the first end of Fashion Week party in New York. It was hosted by Cindy Crawford, Naomi, Christie. It was like a
couple of lightweights.
Yeah, it was like blue jeans and barbecue. The whole idea was like, okay, Fashion Week's over. Just put on your jeans and come have a burger.
Yeah.
And so those kind of moments. But then a famous photographer named Sante D'Orazio married a gal named Cara Young, who was a big model also, and they got married somewhere privately. But the party was at Rex, and all those girls came again. And then at the time, Axl Rose was living with Stephanie Seymour, dating, and that got us national press. But that was when there was only like 3 newspapers that mattered.
Sure.
Imagine today, it would have gone every extra.
Page 6 is page 6, page 7, page 7,000.
So it was funny. So it was all word of mouth, and that was kind of cool and very organic about it. People just would hear in the city like, what is going on in this place?
Let me give you an imaginary play out. So let's say post-COVID things go back to what they were somewhat. I gave you a ton of cash. I gave you $10 million bucks, and I said, you don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to pay me back. You don't have to do anything. I'm a billionaire idiot. Do you want to open a club in New York? Would you do it?
Look, it would be so great, especially listening to legendary Damon, who's been paying tribute to all the old pioneer DJs and stuff like that, to bring back a club that you could have Clark Kent and D Nice and Stretch and Bobito and some of these guys, let them spin and be able to afford them. And, that was, it's all sort of growing, I'm so happy for them. But these are guys who used to play for $500-600 a night.
Right.
Then they go on tour with Diddy or D Nice becomes an international celebrity with what he's done on Instagram. Yeah. And who could possibly afford
I remember with places people like Daft Punk, they were playing for, maybe $50,000, and then all of a sudden they're $2 million if they return your email.
Right. And then, when I got the tour of which club is it in Vegas, in the MGM Grand, I got when they first were getting ready to Hakkasan.
Yep.
And someone walked me through and was explaining to me the economics of how you have to run a business to pay a DJ $400,000. It was just
mind-blowing, right?
Mind-boggling to me.
Do you think so that was a maybe. So if there's a billionaire idiot out there,
if there's a billionaire idiot, come on, man, let's do it together. Yeah.
But do you think you could take people's phones away at the door, like instead of a gun check, a phone check? Damien
tried that at et al.
But that's an era when they were getting excited about it. Is there going to be a point where there's enough people? Like I always joke when somebody says, what would make you happy? And I'll be just rich enough to have, and they go, what, a boat? And I'm like, fuck no. The dude with my phone 2 blocks away and only comes to me if something's falling really down instead of me carrying it and going, would you people do that? Would you think they would consider
what I like to, I said this to someone and they thought I said no homo, which was an odd moment, but no, what I said was no FOMO.
Yep.
What I said to someone who was from California, was visiting me, and we went to check out Jimmy, and they said, what do you think the success is? Because it was really fun that night. Sure. And they said, what do you think? And I said, there's no FOMO here. And first they were like, what did you say? And I said, no. I said, no FOMO. And I said, for whatever reason, this is one of those places where we haven't tried to shoot for that A+. We're not trying to attract, Jamie Foxx that night when he's in town. Great if he comes, but people just come there and they kind of put their phone down. You don't see a lot of that glow in the face. They're just having a great time. They're happy to be with the people they are with. They're not wondering what they're missing out on.
Yep.
And I think that but as I said, Damien tried that at all, and even for me, even for you, like you said, your solution is the best solution I've heard. But I said to Damien when he wanted me to check my phone at all, I'm like, Dame, what am I going to do? I got 4 places open right now. If someone texts me and says,
yeah, of course, but that's the world we've built in. But those days beforehand, there would be some weird phone around the corner, and they'd be like the bat phones. Like I went into, there's a place called Bistecca in Sydney. I go back often, and it was an underground sort of steakhouse, And I went there recently when they opened, and they have a volunteer your phone in a locked drawer with the receptionist, and a beautiful kind of old-fashioned drawer. And I was like, all right, idiots, everybody hand their phone over.
Fantastic.
The faces were like, and I'm like, nobody on this table is curing cancer, okay? Nobody's a brain surgeon on call. You're all fucking idiot restaurateurs. Let's go do this. Everybody put their phone in, and one of my friends later said, so what did you guys do? And I go, we had a conversation, and nobody was interrupted. And it was really beautiful and polarizing at the same time.
To be honest, I'm enjoying sitting here and having put my phone in my bag for an hour. I'm like, whatever.
Right. And then and so all of a sudden everybody's coming back to the idea of engaging. I had this argument with somebody recently that had 6 months ago opened a restaurant and had iPads for their wine list and menus, and I went to their friends and families overseas, and they said, great. I said, everything was great except those fucking menus. And they said, why? And I said, look, we're on these all day.
Right.
I don't want to go out and be on it. Next, you're going to give me a Mac. The social experience and fabric of whether it's clubs or if it's restaurants is touch, feel, engagement. That's why we go out, right?
Right. Sure.
So do you think after this, New York City's now over 1,000 permanent closed restaurants. You've got more restaurants than bars, right? So you're very food driven. The margins are slim. Are you in the midst of negotiating with everyone?
Yeah, we're trying. Luckily, a few of them are management agreements in hotels. So we're not open, but we're also not paying any rent. We're just waiting till they deem to reopen the hotels. we successfully, we're building a restaurant right now that was supposed to be open now. It'll probably open in November. Very trying to do, and you as someone from overseas may appreciate even more than New Yorkers. I'm very friendly with a guy, Indian American guy who was born in Texas, and his dream has always been to sort of do the Indochine or the Nobu of Indian food.
Is he our $10 million guy or?
No, I wish. But we're doing a place on 20th Street next to Gramercy Tavern.
Right. Great location.
Oh, it's an insane location. And we're moving forward with it because after 3 months, the landlord finally came around because at first they're like, no, we're not giving any rent concession.
And now they're like, we'll just give you rent free.
And we're like, well, then we're not building it. And we were lucky that, we were all, there's a degree of pregnancy that, so like, had we been 50% built, they would have held all that. But we hadn't really started the construction. And we said, look, if we walk away from your 4,000 square foot unbuilt space,
you're toast.
Who's taking it?
Yeah, well, there's a lot more of us and a lot more of them and a lot less of us.
Right, and I said anyone who's looking, actually, first of all, I told them, I said, I don't know anyone looking for a new restaurant space. Right. But if they are, they're going to go find a place that was finished 3 months ago and went out of business. They're not taking your blank slate here.
So you had a famous Indian chef as well lined up.
We do. His name is Hari.
Yep.
And we're doing Hari Nayak, and we're doing it with my friend Manish, who's fantastic and kind of knows all of New York. And we're working on it right now. We'll see where it goes. But with the same group, we're supposed to bring back Temple Bar, which is a legendary bar down on Lafayette, with the guys from Attaboy. And that landlord has yet to see the light. And we're kind of like, dude, you don't really think that...
Wake the fuck up.
Like, who's coming here?
I mean, like, listen to you now, right? So, in essence, I don't see you over social media a lot, right? You could be quiet and in the shadows and going, oh, well, I'm kind of going to live my days out just doing... But you're still gunning for stuff. You've still got that spice and ambition. Yeah. Look how much stuff's going on pre this. And you're not talking about packing up, your bat and your ball and going home.
Oh, no. I mean, look... in a weird way, and it's actually, I think it's a very sad thing, and I don't know where it's going to net out. I do think that, unfortunately, a lot of places are not going to come back.
Sure.
And we had raised the money for these deals, or for the ones that are management agreements, that had all been completed pre-pandemic.
Right.
So we're in a unique position where we have the funds sitting in a bank.
Yep.
And as long as the landlords recognize that 8 or 9 or 10% rent is really the way to go.
If they don't recognize that now, when they're never going to recognize it.
And what I didn't know until we did some research was that actually came out of the Depression.
Sure.
That was a development that to keep people alive in their businesses, and it just makes complete sense. And look, we're happy if someone takes a ride with us and gives us 9% rent or something, and then we end up paying more rent than we would have under the agreement.
Sure.
Fantastic.
So you look great for your age for one of the reasons.
Thank
you look great for your age for one of the reasons, but you're not a big drinker.
Mm-mm.
You look fit. You don't. I'm guessing you're not doing heaps of crack or anything like that.
Not this month.
No. We've got one crack. There's not any more. Do you still love Gray's papaya?
Oh my God! How do you even know that? Yeah. Well, I mean, I try to avoid it.
You go for a run, sneak one in, and get home, and go, no, honey, I just don't want to eat as much.
I live 4 blocks from it, so at least once a month, I'll jump out of the subway and I'll be like, just one of those dogs looks really good. But that was, when I was in law school, living on 72nd Street in law school up at Columbia, you don't really have a lot of money when you're a student.
Right.
So for $1.50, that was dinner. It was a pretty good deal.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I noticed about you that came up over and over again, everybody kept asking you in interviews, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? And you just kept saying the same thing. I just want to be a really, really good father.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
Yeah.
I read that maybe 7 or 8 times.
Well, I'm glad I said. I mean, it was very sincere. I had a great dad and mom, and my mom is still around. My dad passed away, and having Tyler was literally the blessing of my life. And he happened to be born around the same time at Lotus, and I always tried to keep my I like to say kind of like I'm in it but not of it.
Yep.
And so I do live on the Upper West Side, and it's funny,
I know. I've got to go up there and to see you because you won't come down the other side.
Well, it's weird.
You treat us like we're in West and North Berlin,
It's so well. I'm not soon. No, because if the Temple Bar opens, I'll be near you a lot. But when it's funny because when we had 3 places at one point in the Meatpacking district, walking around there was good for my ego, but not so good for,
Yes.
You had no life.
Yeah, of course.
Everyone wanted to, when can I come to Lotus? When can I come to Lotus? So I was always very happy to go to the Upper West Side where I was best known at all.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Ty's dad.
Yeah.
I was
That's nice.
Very happy to be known as, that's Tyler's dad.
I did that. I remember when my restaurants in Bondi Beach with I co-founded with my partners blew up. And I remember at the peak, I was pretty exhausted and done with that whole life and the celebrityism. And I remember I was at the beach in a wetsuit with my board, and a guy walks up and he's some, rich dude with 2 young girls. And he's like, "Hey, great to see you. Listen, I couldn't get a table for Thursday. You reckon you can get me a table for 5 at 4:45? And I'm like, dude, I'm in my fucking surfing. You're like, what do you want to write it in the sand? I just looked at him and I went, sure. I sat there and I was like, I don't have my phone or anything. Look, amazing to have you. We need to get you, Baker, and I've got a couple other ideas on a round table. Probably have to get Baker on Zoom.
That'd be fun as hell.
And find out some more stories.
Mark
about you.
has, like 47 lives. I mean, he would come to meetings and be like, "Yeah, I just crashed my motorcycle, but
again,
but I'm okay."
Yeah, I'm okay, and I'm here. Yeah. Well, he was very honest about the fact that you basically did all the really, noble, moral compass stuff, and he basically just,
Hey, but you know what? At the end of the day, both Mark and Jeffrey, they were a little bit crazy, of course, but they're good souls. And, Will and I, we didn't want to, life's short, you know what I mean? And like, we didn't want to work with people that we didn't like.
I haven't got one person that said anything negative about you at all.
Ah,
I tried to find them. But thanks for coming on the show. You've been an absolute pleasure.
Fantastic. My pleasure.
Awesome.
So much fun.
Take care. That's it for this week, peeps. If you're enjoying the show, just go to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or whatever podcast player you listen to, and ideally give us 5-star rating, if we deserve it, of course. It will help other people like you discover us. If you want to find out more on what we get up to, or to suggest someone we should interview, let us know. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at The Raw Hospitality Show. The show is a Fabrica Collective production produced by Mark Fellows and Samantha Webb, music by Jindal.